Well, Tasty Cake Company in Philadelphia did not hire African Americans as drivers, in upper level jobs, and so there was a picket line around in front of the Tasty Cake factory building. And so for Philadelphia, you say, "Oh, Tasty Cake boycott." I remember that. And then, yeah, I remember, no, don't eat any tasty cake until they hire black workers. And so I was involved in that on that picket line. And then you had Cecil B. Moore, who was
how old were you?
Yeah, Cecil B.
How
Moore.
old were you when you were on that picket line?
Right. Cecil Moore had picket lines around the post office, the 30th Street post office. He had picket lines around Trailways bus terminal in downtown Philadelphia. And the largest one is the one that I write about in Young Crusaders, in my book, The Young Crusaders, the Girard College boycott and protests around the walls that surrounded Girard College, which was located in North Philadelphia, but had no black boys were allowed to enroll. And so
let me slow you down. I don't think our audience knows the significance of Girard College. So tell us something about Girard College and put it in the context historically, and then bring us up to date, because Girard College was a site of a presidential discussion just a month or so ago, right?
Oh, well, Girard College was at the bequest of Stephen Girard, who was a financier in Philadelphia in the early 19th century, and he left this bequest for the opening of a school for poor white orphan boys. And so this school was built on a 45-acre tract in North Philadelphia. It provided elementary and secondary education all the way through high school to orphan boys. They really admitted fatherless boys, it turned out. And it had these 9-foot high thick walls surrounding it. And it was in the heart of North Philadelphia. And so when the Brown decision was decided in 1954, Raymond Pace Alexander, who was a councilman and later a judge in Philadelphia, launched a suit against Girard College to allow black boys to enter, and he did it in the name of two 6- and 7-year-old black boys, and that suit was turned down. The board of trustees at Girard College fought to oppose allowing black boys to attend the school. Each time they fought, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Oh. And finally, the state of Pennsylvania said that, well, the Girard College receives public funds, so they should allow black boys to attend since it receives these public funds. Well, they decided, the trustees decided that they would no longer accept public funds and that they would have private trustees, and they would not allow black boys to enroll in the school. And so this is in 1965. 64 and 65. And so Cecil B. Moore, famous lawyer in Philadelphia, became president of the NAACP. And he was one of these militant direct action protests NAACP leaders. There were, some places around the country that, NAACP was quiet and middle class and didn't engage in direct action protests. Cecil B. Moore engaged in direct action protests. And he said, I'm going to have picket lines around Girard College until they allow black boys to enroll. And so we were on those picket lines, and the picket lines were there all year. From 64, 65, people were marching around, and in Young Crusaders, what I focus in on are the teenagers who participated in that protest. I was a teenager at that time. I was in the protest, but Cecil Moore knew the teenage gang members in North Philadelphia, and he got the gang members to serve as marshals to direct people around the picket lines at Girard College, and by the end of 1965, the state of Pennsylvania decided, this was Governor William Scranton, decided that he would support the lawsuit against Girard College and make sure that this discrimination ends, and took up the whole issue, after this years of protests by Cecil Moore. So I was involved in all of that. I mean, I was, my uncle, Jack T. Franklin, was a major photojournalist in Philadelphia at the time. And so I had his whole pictures that covered the Girard College protest, the Trailways bus protest, the 30th Street bus stop, as part of his photographic collection that is now available at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. The Jack T. Franklin collection at the African American Museum in Philadelphia has over 300,000 photos and negatives that he took as a photojournalist working for the newspapers in Philadelphia.
These are overwhelmingly of Black Philadelphia folk.
Right? No, he covered the March on Washington. He covered the Selma March in the book that I did with Betty Collier Thomas, My Soul is a Witness, the chronology of the Civil Rights era. We have many of his photos from the March on Washington, from the Selma to Montgomery March, and Dr. King speaking in New York and various other parts of the region as well. No, the collection covers Philadelphia, but also these major civil rights activities. So I was introduced to that in high school. And then when I went to college at Penn State.
I want you to slow back. I want you to slow back and pick up this point about Girard College.
Yeah.
Because today, as I understand it, isn't Girard College majority or all Black boys school?
Yes.
Okay.
But also girls.
That's a tremendous transformation.
But it's girls too. Girls, right. In 1983, they challenged the fact that there was only boys were allowed to enter and girls were allowed. So it's majority Black girls and boys now at Girard College.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's a phenomenal change from we don't want one to now it's majority Black. But
you have to keep in mind that it was in a majority Black community all along. That is the other side of that wall. It was all Black people and stuff. They just couldn't go to the school. So that's why
they had the 9-foot walls, VP, to keep y'all out.
Right. That's why they built the wall.
So now I want you to talk a bit more about your formative years, because you know that I'm close to Bill Cross, and I'm a devotee of his theory of negrescence, the Negro to Black conversion process or Black identity formation. And so I want you to talk about how you move through crosses, statuses to become who you are today, a preeminent Black scholar activist. So can you talk about what kinds of things that you were doing beyond just the Girard and the Tasty protests? What other things were you engaged in? What were you reading? What's the formation that gets us to the radical VP Franklin today?
I just happened to be in college. I started college in 1965. And so in 1966, of course, you had Black Power, and we were involved in trying to get Black faculty and Black history courses at Penn State University. I think when Penn State when I got there, Penn State University, when I got there, they in 66, they must have, at the main campus with like 30,000 students, they had about 75 blacks at State University. And so we recruited students, but then we mobilized. We had black student organizations that developed among that small group, and aligned ourselves with the white students who supported our activities. And this was the SDS, Students for Democratic Society, SDS, the radical group on campus, so that we were aligned with them. And we challenged the university and made demands on the universities for the hiring of black faculty, creating black courses, and the SDS supported us in those protests because there weren't that many black students on the campus. In addition, you had the Douglass Society, which was the Frederick Douglass Society, which was the black organization, and we engaged in protests and activities, brought speakers to campus, and held rallies and meetings. We eventually had a Black Arts Festival where we had Nina Simone and Rufus Harley and other black artists, etc., come to the Black Arts Festival at Penn State. And so and you have to keep in mind that this included occupying buildings. When I donated my papers, when I donated my papers to the Penn State Library, I donated a copy of the newspaper from January 1969, where it quotes me, and I'm inside the Old Main building participating in the protests. And on the front page, they're quoting me inaccurately, but my name is on the front page of the Penn State newspaper in January 69, with me inside Old Main when we had the demonstration. And then once the president agreed to begin to negotiate our demands and stuff, we left. In other words, they were going to call out the police to remove us, but we negotiated with them, and so they did not arrest us, but they just set up a mechanism for us to negotiate the demands that we were making for changes at the university. So yes, I was involved in those protests at Penn State in the late 1960s to get. And what is really important, so that by 69, we had about 500 Black students at Penn State. By 1970, we had 1,500. And then from there, the numbers increased. And then you had Black professors and Afro-American studies courses and programs and stuff. So I was involved in that. And then when I went to Harvard, I was at Harvard, and got a dual degree in history and social studies education. And I wanted to be able to teach. I actually went back and taught at one of the schools that Cecil Moore had been picketing back in 1963. I went back after I graduated from Harvard with my social studies and history degree. I decided I'm going back to North Philadelphia, teaching the public schools there. So I ended up teaching in a public school that was picketed in the early 1960s. So I'm there in 1971. And so in the 1963, when it was being built, Strawberry Mansion Junior High School, when there's a picture in my uncle's collection, and when they do his exhibits and stuff, we have this picture, and he has this picture of my father holding up a placard saying, hire Black workers, and at Strawberry Mansion Junior High School. And in 1970-71, I was teaching there. After I had graduated from Harvard, and went back and taught at Strawberry Mansion Junior High School. It was very, very interesting, very hard work and stuff. And I taught there for about a year. And I also taught in Upward Bound and Head Start and, and various other programs. but I also like doing research. I didn't mind doing research and scholarly pursuits. So I decided that I would go back and get my PhD. So I taught in the public schools, I taught in junior college, taught in Upward Bound for 3 years. And then I decided I would go back and get my PhD from the University of Chicago, but I would not get it just in the history department. I was accepted in the history department at the University of Chicago to work with John Hope Franklin in 1969 when I finished, but I went to Harvard instead. But in 1972, I decided that I would go to the University of Chicago, but I would go in history of education. I would in the education department.
So explain that decision.
Right. Well, basically, I had been teaching. I taught in Head Start. I taught in Upward Bound. I taught junior high school. I taught high school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I taught high school in Newton, Mass. And then I taught at Delaware County Community College. I taught community college students. And so when I decided to go back to get the PhD, I wanted to be in education as well as in history. Okay. And so when I went to the University of Chicago, I had been accepted at the University of Chicago in the history department in 69. But when I went back and when I actually reapplied, I reapplied to be in the Department of Education because one, I knew I would still get to work with John Hope Franklin, because there was only one historian of education on the faculty at the University of Chicago's Department of Education at the time. And so I had to take courses in the history department, and I had to work with John Hope Franklin and stuff. So that meant that I was in both education. So I have a whole cadre of colleagues and stuff that are in education, in colleges of education. And when I graduated from the University of Chicago, my first job was at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, in the College of Education. Education at the University of Chicago. So, at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And so I always had, so in my career, I have been in schools of education and in departments of history. And so, when I went to Yale, after I left Illinois and went to Yale to teach, I was in the history department. And in Yale, they had no school of education. They had no department of education, but they needed historians of education, educational psychologists, sociologists of education for their teacher training program. They had a teacher training program at Yale. They had no school of education, but they hired people in education in the psychology department, in the sociology department, in the history department, to teach those courses that were a part of the teacher education program at Yale. So when I went to Yale, I was working with John Blassingame, the great scholar of slavery in the South. And he taught the graduate courses in African American history at Yale, and I taught the undergraduate courses in African American studies. And then I taught history of education courses in the teacher education program. So I got to Yale in 1977, and it was
wait. I want to roll you back, okay? So that's your educational biography, but I wanted to get at how you became you, and that's a little bit deeper than your academic education. So one of the things I want to get at is you end up with a fairly nationalistic, radical ideology. You didn't get that at Harvard's School of Education. And you sure as hell didn't get it at the University of Chicago. So what are you reading? Who are you interacting with that pushes you in the direction that we see your latter, the works that you subsequently produce? Sisters in Struggle, Black Self-Determination. How do we get there, VP?
Yeah, right. Well, for example, my master's thesis at Harvard was on the priests who were working with enslaved Africans who were being brought to the New World, to Cartagena in New Granada in Spain, which is now Colombia, and actually supposedly converting them to Christianity, and then enslaving them and converting them to Christianity. And so I was raised Catholic. I mean, went to Catholic schools and and Catholic high school. So my family was very Catholic, and so I was interested in this. But what the Catholic Church had been saying was that Alonso de Sandoval wrote this manual for priests working with enslaved Africans coming into New Granada, and it was an anti-slavery tract. It was an abolitionist tract. It was, it was, that is, he was saying that you have to save these people because slavery is wrong, and the church is opposed to it, and you got to try to help these people as much as you can, baptize them, and help them get out of, be free from slavery. This is what the Catholic Church was saying. I found the handbook in the Library of Congress and started translating it, because it was from the 17th century. It was published in 1628. And I started translating it, and I said, "This is not an abolitionist anti-slavery tract. This is supporting slavery, saying that, oh yeah, they're the children of Ham. Yeah, to be a slave of a Christian master is better than being a leader in an African tribe, and it was a justification of an enslavement of Africans." And I said, "This is crazy." I said, and I translated it, and that was my master's thesis. And I was eventually published in the Journal of Negro History, a version of it. And what was interesting was that one of the major when I got to Yale, one of the major historians of slavery, slavery in the history of world civilization, David Bryan Davis. Bryan Davis, one of the leading historians of slavery in the Western world. He was on the faculty, and he evaluated me for when I was promoted at Yale. He was the chairman of the committee that promoted me from assistant professor to associate professor. Because even though I was non-tenure track, I still could be promoted. So I was promoted by 1981, and David Bryan Davis was the chair of my promotion committee. And he had said that Sandoval's handbook was an anti-slavery tract. And so I said, well, David, I translated this and it's not. He said, "You know what? I never read it." He said, "I was basing my interpretation of Alonso Sandoval's book on this French translation, this French historian, and I had never read the book. You certainly changed my view of that." So that was one way that I was exposing lies, exposing misinformation about the African American experience when I was at Harvard. When I went to the University of Chicago, my PhD, I did the Education of Black Philadelphia, and of course that's Du Bois. Du Bois is Philadelphia Negro. My book starts in 1900, and of course the Philadelphia Negro came out in 1898. And so I'm looking at education in Black Philadelphia after Du Bois's Philadelphia Negro. So I'm a Du Boisian from the beginning. So I knew that. That there was an important relationship between the scholarship that I was engaged in, unearthing, and social activism, and changing things and stuff. And so I just followed Du Bois, in in the type of research that I did, thorough, statistical analysis, various kinds of
Mhm.
education of Black Philadelphia. I did it from over the 50 years, and then I had an epilogue that did it up to 1970s when it was
So you're
published.
not writing just a narrative, you're writing in the vein of the new social history.
Right. Oh, yeah. And that, yes, this is new from the bottom up. History from the bottom up. This is the social history. And the way that my book, my study of the education of Black Philadelphia was distinctive was because I did not just look at the education that was available to African Americans in Philadelphia in the public and private schools, informal education. I also looked at the informal education, the community education. So I documented the educational programs in the YMCA, the educational programs in the fraternities and the sororities, in the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History with Black History Month. So I documented the internal, informal educational processes and activities and the newspapers, of course, it took place in Philadelphia, as well as what was going on in the Philadelphia public schools for African Americans for over that first half of the 20th century, and the Catholic schools as well.
Because I know that the education of Black Philadelphia has become a model for people doing local educational history and local history in general. I want to jump to the present for a moment, and I want you to pick up something in terms of this discussion around Kamala Harris's identity. The Trump discussion from the National Black Journalists Association, and his disparaging racist remarks. Well, the comedian Roy Wood Jr. I don't know if you're familiar with Roy Wood Jr.
I've experienced them.
Okay. So he asked a question, and it went viral. And his question was, "When did you turn Black?" And it got something like 14 million hits or something, some absurd number of responses. And some of them are silly. Many of them are thoughtful. They often deal with culture, right? Being socialization in terms of Black community. But they also deal with what Bill Cross calls encounters, those situations, those incidents, those racist incidents that you have with white folk that forces you to think about the depth in which you come to understand that racial oppression is salient, right? So you got that stuff. And so I want you to kind of respond to that. But I also want you to talk about this idea that Henry Louis Gates has put into the public, that there's 40 million ways to be Black. So I'm trying to pick up something from your book, Black Self-Determination, where you're talking about a core culture. So what I want you to do is take that notion of a core culture, which I think you probably got from John Naulton's Dry Long Soul. We're talking about core culture. So I want you to put that notion of a core culture in relationship to the idea that there's 40 million ways to be Black, and the idea that from Donald Trump's point of view, that because Kamala Harris doesn't look a particular way, that she cannot be Black.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate, because I'm sure that Kamala Harris, in the circles that she was brought up in, and in these places where she lived, and the schools that she attended, that she was victimized by racial discrimination in those places. That is the way. So if you say, well, how did you become Black? At Penn State, we couldn't go outside of the Happy Valley
Yeah.
because of the hillbillies.
You know, I spent a
in North
semester there.
Appalachia. That they were not too friendly.
Yeah.
When I was at Harvard, and I keep in mind I'm at Harvard in '69 and '70, '71. And there's none of the busing controversy or any of that had happened. That was much later after I was there, but I'm there early '70s, and there were parts of Boston that Black people couldn't go into, and so that if I so there was like a line in Cambridge, so you would go shopping in Cambridge and stuff, and you go up Mass Avenue. And Mass Avenue went up into Somerville. It went from Cambridge into Somerville. Well, Somerville was like South Boston at the time, where if you were a Black person walking in that area, you were liable to be stopped or to be harassed or etc. So I experienced that at Penn State. I experienced that at Harvard. You were parts of Boston and Cambridge where you can't walk without being attacked. In Chicago, I remember one time I was going through southwestern Chicago on public transportation, and I was waiting for a bus to transfer. I'm transferring buses. I'm going from one bus to another, and I'm standing on the corner waiting for a bus in this southwest part of predominantly white part of Chicago, and people driving by, they start hollering, cursing at me, and throwing cans and stuff at me, and all I'm doing is waiting for a bus, there. And so I'm sure that Kamala Harris, there incidents in stores, incidents in playgrounds, in school, that these people let her know that she's Black. And there were certain places that Black people were not supposed to go, they're not supposed to be. And she was therefore victimized by various forms of discrimination. And so I was victimized by those kinds of things as well. But at the same time, there was also this idea of that white is right or white is superior, and all of that. And I just did not understand that. I just I couldn't wrap my head around that, because I had always gone to school with white students. Remember, I went to Catholic school.
Right.
And I had always gone to school with, I always tell people the story of Elizabeth Metz when I was in elementary school, in Catholic school. I went to Most Precious Blood of Our Lord Parish School, Blood for short. So I went to Blood, and my brother was in the 4th grade, and Elizabeth Metz was in the 5th grade. My brother and Elizabeth.
You froze on me, VP.
She stayed in the 5th grade for 3 years. And so somebody said that white people were smarter or they were superior. I was always going to school with them. I was always competing. I was always with them. And they said, no, they are superior. And in fact, what I'm going to be doing in my research is that I am going to be doing research on Black people that is superior to the research that white people are doing on white people. So, that was always, because
But if you go to school with white people, you understand those things. But I want to get back to this question about a core culture in relationship to this notion that there isn't a common culture, that we're dealing with 40 million individuals, right? Because I see that as the basis upon which, if you don't think about socialization, that we become Black through socialization. This ain't biology. It's not genetics. It ain't DNA. It's a socialization into a culture, right? So can you talk about the core culture concept?
Right, right. Well, when I was when after I finished a Black Self-Determination, and I was interested in cultural history because I felt that you could not understand the attachment to education that African Americans had without understanding what they experienced. It was on the basis of what happened to them that they understood that education was important, and it was in many ways a pathway to freedom. That on the basis of what happened to them, they said, "Oh, I need to read. I need to know how to read. I need to know how to write. And if I can't learn how to read or write, I want my children and my grandchildren to learn how to read and write." So that was on the African Americans were before the Civil War were enslaved, and so that freedom what became a core value, that they know that freedom was something that was good. It was defined as valuable, important, good on the basis of their experience of enslavement. So freedom becomes a core value for African Americans.
So you got education,
Right.
freedom,
And then they said, "What did you do to deserve to be enslaved? What did you do that you deserve to be enslaved? What did your mother do? What did your father do to make you deserving of being enslaved?" They said, "Well, they didn't do anything." I mean, I didn't do anything. They said, "Well," they said, "Yes." They said, "In fact, slavery is a sin. To hold somebody in slavery is really a sin. And to resist the enslavement is to do the will of God. Because I hadn't done anything, you hadn't done anything to deserve this enslavement. And so therefore to resist that enslavement was to do the will of God, because slavery was a sin." That's the difference between white Christianity and Black Christianity. White Christianity could not accept the doctrine that slavery is sin, and that anybody that enslaves anybody else is a sinner. And that becomes a core value in Black religion. That's it. So it's like the liberation theology versus traditional Christianity.
So you got education.
Is this Jesus of the oppressed and trying to free the oppressed, or is he just to maintain the status quo? And so those are fundamental differences, but but for African Americans, they become core. Education, freedom, resistance, and self-determination, because all Black institutions are important to guarantee the education, the freedom, and the resistance. Self-determination, Black control institutions. You can be in a way, but you Black control. So you just think about Black control schools, businesses, churches. These are good because those self-determined, Black controlled institutions guarantee or can work collectively toward the freedom, the education, and they provide the education. They support the resistance and stuff. So the core values, freedom, resistance, education, and self-determination, explain why Garvey was so popular in the 19th. Because keep in mind, when I'm writing this in the early 1980s. And it was when the Garvey papers were found. I don't know whether you remember that. These Marcus Garvey papers had been found. They had been lost for years. And the first volumes of the Marcus Garvey papers were being published by the University of California, UCLA. They were publishing the first and the second volume of the Marcus Garvey papers. And so they said, well, wait a minute. Now, if, if Marcus Garvey attracted hundreds of thousands of Black people, he must have been saying something that they already believed in, because he didn't get here until 1916. So, so it had to, in order to explain why, and this got me in trouble. This got me in trouble.
Roll back. We're gonna come there, VP. But here's what I want you to do, right? Because at one level, here's what it sounds like. You came up with some core values, right? But that's not what happened. You talk about the research. What are you researching? What's the documents that you're looking at that allow you to then identify these 4 core values? Because you don't make them up, right? They're there in the lives of Black African Americans, and you simply unearth, right? So can you talk about what are you looking at? What's your sources? Where are you pulling this from?
Yeah. Well, I documented all of it because it's a cultural history. All right. So if you look at the subtitle, A Cultural History of African American Resistance. So I use oral testimony, the slave narratives, the interviews, the letters, etc., that were published, but basically the slave narratives to document these values. Then I use the songs, the spirituals. I use the spirituals. You look at the wording in the spiritual. Go down, Moses. Go down to Egypt land. Let my people go. This is, So you had to. And what is important about this is that I document them at the time of emancipation, so that they're documented by whites who discover these songs once they Northern whites get into these missionary activities in these Southern states, and they say, oh, these people had this view that they were going to be freed at some time anyway, and they were singing about it. And I'm going to copy down this song. And so you had slave songs of the United States published. The first version of these spirituals was published in 1863. Because it was by these Northern white missionaries who went to the South and said, oh, these songs, they were singing about this and singing about this. And they said, and these songs, they had all these kind of, and one of the, one of them was this Go Down Moses. And so I used those. Then for the later period, for the post-emancipation period, I used the interviews with the Black Southerners that were collected as part of the Senate and House investigating commissions in the 1870s, the so-called Ku Klux Klan investigations and stuff. And that's 13 volumes of 600 pages each volume, and each state, and people have used them since to write all of these studies of the terror and abuse, etc. But I was one of the first persons to use that material. I'm using in the early 1980s.
They haven't been used as much as they should have.
Right. But I use them. Let me see. I used all that testimony that in each of those commissions, that was first person accounts of what happened, the terrorism that they were victimized, the how they managed to acquire land, and then how they lost this land, how it was taken from them, how they would testify about how they would make a crop, on the land. This owner would say, we make a crop, and then the owner, he would call on these vigilantes, these Ku Kluxers, and they would come and they would run us out when the crop was brought in. And they would come in and they would steal all of the produce that they had created and stuff. And so the testimony, this firsthand testimony of these that in these congressional investigating committees in the 1870s, in the 1880s, and the 1890s. And then once you get to the early 20th century, you have the Du Bois Atlanta University studies. And so the Atlanta University studies, the annual studies, he looked at schools, he looks at professions, he looks at, and so so those document the circumstances for African Americans at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. So it's a cultural history. I use songs, sayings, poems, letters, testimonies. Those are the kinds of things that I use to document these values. Now, the problems that I read into.
Yeah, that's
was that. They said, well, they said, so one prominent scholar that was in African American studies when I was there with him, right wing, said, oh, VP Franklin, he put words in the mouth of these Black people. And I said, yeah, putting words in the mouths of these Black people, because I'm finding these statements, these testimonies and stuff. I said, yes. I said, but how do you explain the response to Garvey? How do you explain that? Does From Slavery to Freedom and Integration explain the response to Garvey? I said this, and that was where because all of the major scholars who were writing African American history in the 60s, the 70s, and into the 80s, and most of them were white scholars, so they dominated the field. But their interpretation was that African Americans are moving from slavery to freedom. They're being integrated into American society, and it's an integrationist,
and they're assimilating. Yeah,
right. They're being integrated into and that's where the movement is. And I said, well, no, I said this, because this was the 20th century, and you had Marcus Garvey, and his movement, attracting hundreds of thousands. So it's not, and so that when I then challenged the integrationist argument, that and keep in mind, this was the argument that was made famous by scholars. It was known as the from plantation to ghetto thesis.
Yeah.
That's African.
So we're talking about August Mott.
Right. And I was doing community studies. Okay. Yeah. So you had all these ghetto studies that were being published and stuff, and I'm doing a community study on Philadelphia, and then looking at these core values, and so I was challenging, all of these, this integrationist interpretation of the African American experience.
VP, go back and distinguish what a community study is from a ghetto study. You're talking about community building, but what's the difference between
right? So, well, what you had entering, coming in, were studies such as before the ghetto, under the ghetto, over the ghetto, down by the ghetto. I mean, these are titles of books that, and from plantation to ghetto was like the overall,
it's
interpretation, and stuff. So that African Americans are going from bad to worse, in their experience and stuff. And so the terrible things that they did or happened to them before that lead to the terrible things that are happening to them now, or at that time, that created the ghettoization of this. And so, and and I challenged these studies in articles when I reviewed these books when they came out. I said, no, I said, you have things such, I said, first thing, you have things that are known as like gilded ghettos that the Jews live in, and they're wealthy areas and stuff. Like ghetto is really an area of with people with the same ethnic or religious background. That and you know, that is, you know, it does not necessarily have to be a slum. And
Right.
what they were arguing was that African American, the ghetto was a slum, and that, you know, and that's it was from plant that was the movement from plant to these slums, these slum ghettos that they were in the 1960s or 1970s, etc. And
So when you
I grew up in North Philadelphia, and I didn't know anything about this. You know, it was like this when you go to the sociology class. Even though I went to the sociology class at Penn State, and they say, yeah, the North Philly, it's one of those ghettos. They don't have churches, and they don't have institutions. I said, what is he talking about? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I live in North Philadelphia. I had Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. We had YMCA. I was in Catholic school. I went to camp, summer camp, in the summer. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I grew up in the community in North Philadelphia, and they were talking about an area that may have become a slum area, which you have slums around the world and stuff. And so that, but where I, but they were calling the area that I grew up in the community, this. So that was the challenge. And so for example, you had the riot in Philadelphia in 1963. It was one of the early riots, and it was in North Philadelphia, and I was there. I was in junior high school at that time, and I, my parents, of course, did not want me to go out into the street while this was going, while all of this was going on. And but I went out. I snuck out and went, and I saw, and what had happened was that they had a riot in New York City, in Brooklyn and Harlem the month before, because this was like the end of August, beginning of September.
So you're talking about the 64
Yeah.
Rebellion?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is 64. Did I say 63? 64.
Yeah, you said 63. Yeah.
No, 64. I'm sorry. 64, because I was in June. I was still a junior. I was graduated in 65. So this is you had the riot, and in New York, you had the riot in New York the weeks before, and I remember that the one of the horrors of it was that they were shooting looters in New York. And so they said, this is horrible. They don't shoot looters. You can't just sue somebody because they got to take the television down. You can't just shoot them down for that and stuff. And so when the riot broke out in Philadelphia, they said, don't shoot the looters, as people that are looting. And but I was happy, went out, snuck out to see what was going on, all of the police and all of this. And I happened to see a store in the neighborhood that had been looted and had been broken up and looted and all of that. And, and one of the reasons was because they knew they were being overcharged and robbed by the person all along, and that they were resentful of that. And so they took advantage of that because the person had treated them badly when they went into the store. And so it was looted, and they were looters in it. Then the police came up. Police drove up and went into the store and these people were in the store getting stuff, and the policemen dragged the people out the store and beat them with these billy clubs. They didn't shoot them, but they beat them. I saw this within an inch of their life. And so I knew what I understood that. I understood why it occurred. The police brutality in Philadelphia under Frank Rizzo is notorious.
Yeah, it's just notorious.
I experienced it. All my friends experienced it. We all knew about it. And so I understood. I understood why that happened, and et cetera. And I also came to understand that was the real reason why I was allowed to go to Harvard. And that the riot was the reason why I was allowed to go to the University of Chicago. I was, that I got all
Yeah.
these postdoctoral fellowships because of the riots that had occurred. And I understood that. And so therefore I thought that I had to give back. So I went back and taught in the public schools. I taught, in junior college. And then I did this research on all these things. And then I did the Black self-determination and paid heavily for it.
Okay, now this is what I want you to get to in terms of the consequences, because when you did Black self-determination, it's part of a compass of a small compass of radical and nationalistic books that come out in that moment. There's Sterling Stuckey's Slave Culture that comes out, nationalist foundations of Black America. There's your book, Black Self-Determination. There's Gerald Horne's book, Men. But anyway, so there's consequences because this is really the first wave of academic books that are coming out that take a Black nationalist and a socialistic stance. So what did academia, how did academia respond to Black self-determination?
Well, I was at Yale, and was promoted at Yale, and I was there, but I was going back and forth to New York, and I wanted to be in New York City. I had been in New Haven for 9 years, and by that time it had become No Haven. And so I did not. So I wanted to go to New York City and live in New York City. I got another fellowship, and I was a scholar in residence at the Schomburg Center for Black Culture in History for the 1985-86 school year, while I tried to get a job. And I had interviewed. Well, some places I didn't wasn't even bothered. They didn't bother even to interview me for jobs that existed. But with the places that I did have interviews, they made it very clear that they were not interested in hiring me because of my work, and that they thought, and some of them put in writing that I was not a real historian, that I was just a Black nationalist polemicist trying to pass himself off as a historian. And they put this in writing. Now, keep in mind, I had studied with John Hope Franklin, Yale was a top history department. I was promoted there. I was on the editorial board of the Journal of American History before Nathan Huggins at Harvard. When I left the editorial board of the Journal of American History in 1986, Nathan Huggins was my replacement in the area of African American history. And so, and I had received national fellowships. Competitive fellowships, all of them were competitive, but some of them were extremely competitive. Fellowships. I had been at the National Humanities Center. I had a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship for a year. I was at the National Humanities Center. And and I had published 3 books. The Black New Perspectives on Black Educational History was really path-breaking in terms of Black educational history and stuff. And so I had published in all these articles. But when Black self-determination came out, and I had interviews at the University of Michigan, Northwestern University, William and Mary University, Wesley. I had interviews at these Wesleyan University, Stony Brook University. So that's that year. Remember, I have a year that I'm at the Schomburg Center, a fellowship. So I can go and do these interviews because I'm just on a fellowship year. But many times I was insulted at these interviews because one of the problems was that Louis Farrakhan was very prominent at the time. Keep in mind that how Jesse Jackson had run in 1984, and Louis Farrakhan was supporting him, and there were all these problems and stuff, and they used that as a reason to say, "Oh, that's what your Black self-determination that is about." I said, "No, I'm a scholar." I said, "I've been working on this for years. I wrote it at the National Humanities Center. You know what I mean? You know, or the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship." I said, so this is a scholarly work. This is not, no, that's not, no, we just, you just a Black nationalist. And I'm on a fellowship. So I don't have any money. This is a fellowship year. And these people are insulting me at these interviews. I found out in some cases there were telephone messages, telephone conversations denouncing me. There were letters and statements of, by historians, prominent historians denouncing me. And in Northwestern, when they asked me who should get letters of recommendation to send to Northwestern, I said Mary Frances Berry, William Julius Wilson. William Julius Wilson was on my dissertation committee.
Okay.
John Hope Franklin and John Blassingame. So those were people who were going to write letters of recommendation for me when they asked me at Northwestern.
Right.
I went to this interview. Leon Forrest was the head of the Afro-American Studies program at the time. He brought me in. I didn't hear anything after the interview. 6 months, I finally called Leon. I said, "Leon, what?" I said, "I haven't heard from you. I mean, I went for the interview for the job. I never heard from you." He said, "Well, we really couldn't consider you after we saw those letters." And I said, John Hope Franklin, Mary Frances Berry, William Julius Wilson, and John Blassingame were never contacted by Northwestern University for letters of recommendation. What are you referring to? They never contacted them.
Wow.
But they went out and got letters of denunciation
who they wanted. Yeah.
To prevent me from getting that. So I didn't get another interesting one was Lehman College, where I didn't have an interview. I sent in my letter and books and and all applied for the job. And within like 2 weeks later, because a friend of mine knew the dean of the College of Education, because this was a position in educational history, and knew the dean of education, and said I should apply. So I sent all that stuff in, and like a week or 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the chairman of the search committee, who was also the chairman of the department. He said, "Oh, thank you for your letter, but you're not really the person that we're interested in, et cetera." 6 months later, I run into the dean of Lehman College School of Education. He said, "Why didn't you apply for that job in history of education that we had?" I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, you didn't apply for that. You may have gotten that job." I said, "I did apply." And he said, "You did? We never saw your application."
Yeah.
So it was those. So that's what happened to me, and so I was desperate, because remember, I'm on a fellowship in 1985 to 86, and two colleagues who were married that I knew that I went to the University of Chicago with, Elsie Moore and Wade Smith, were teaching at Arizona State University. And Arizona State University in 1986 is not the Arizona State University that you have now. Right. It was just big. It was the state school, 50,000 students living in the shadow of the flagship university in the state, the University of Arizona. So, and they were there, but they were there because they had 3 little boys, and they wanted to raise their 3 little boys in that atmosphere. So she was in the College of Education, and he was in the Department of Sociology. And they said, "Oh yes, there's a position." They convinced the people to bring me in for an interview, and I'm desperate, because I'm running out of money, time, and stuff. And so they said, "Okay, we will bring you in, and uh, and we will give you tenure. You'll be associate professor with tenure." I said, "I'm already an associate professor." I said, "And am I eligible for a full professorship since I have 3 books and many articles, a whole slew of peer-reviewed articles as well, fellowships and postdocs and, and all of that?"
Yeah.
They said, "We will give you tenure at associate professor level. But we do not pay moving expenses." And I said, "I'm in New York City. This is Phoenix, Tempe, Arizona, outside Phoenix." I said, "This is 3,000 miles. They said, "Well, we have a credit union."
Wow.
So go to the credit union and take out a loan so that you can move your stuff from New York City to Tempe, Arizona.
That's unheard of. We're running out of time. We got 15 minutes. I want to get to.
I stayed in Arizona. I just want to say, in Arizona, I was a scholar activist.
Yeah.
The Martin Luther King holiday was the major political issue. I was involved in all of the campaigns that led to the impeachment of Governor Evan Meacham, and I was the head Negro in charge in the Phoenix Tempe area between 1987 and 1990.
Thank you for that. I may have to bring you back, but in the time that we got left, I want you to talk about the latest 2 works, the Reparations and Repertoire Justice, and the Young Crusaders. I want to spend the bulk of the time on the Young Crusaders, but in terms of the Reparations book, can you say something about your engagement with reparations and significance of that collection?
Yeah, well, when I was editor of the Journal of African American History, I began publishing materials on reparations and reparations movement, beginning with The Debt by Randall Robinson. The Debt, that was reviewed, and then we had a symposium on Mary Frances Berry's "My Face is Black is True," ex-slave reparations, the ex-slave reparations movement, which documented the campaign for reparations for formerly enslaved people. So we had a symposium on that published in the Journal of African American History in 2006. Then in 2009, I issued a call for papers for a special issue on reparations. And that special issue came out in 2012. And Ronald Walters, the great Ron Walters, the political scientist at the University of Maryland, who had been an advisor of Jesse Jackson's political campaign, he was the first person to respond, and he sent me an article on reparations movements in South Africa, and where he had been monitoring those truth and reconciliation processes that had taken place, and then he compared that to reparations in the United States. He sent me an article. He died unfortunately in 2011, but his article it was included in that special issue, and he was on the cover of that reparations special issue in 2012. Very happily, I sent the special issue out to many people, many journalists and scholars, including Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I'm very happy that Ta-Nehisi Coates in 2014, 2 years later, published his article on the case for reparations in Atlantic, and some some ambitious graduate student someday will compare that article with what was published in 2012 in the special issue. And I think that they will find that there's quite a bit of overlap. But in any case, I was happy about it. I was happy about that. So then in 2015, the National African American Reparations Commission was formed by Dr. Ron Daniels, who was the president of the Institute for the Black World 21st Century.
Right.
We had the CARICOM nations had created their CARICOM Reparations Commission in 2013. They were invited to New York City to participate in this conference that the Institute for the Black World held in April 2015, and he created, Ron Walters initiated the National African American Reparations Commission, and I was invited to join the commission. So I was on the National African American Reparations Commission all the way up until about 2018, and attended all of their meetings and organized reparations town hall meetings. I organized a session at the International Reparations meeting that took place at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland in 2015. I was at the conference in New York in 2015, the initial conference. I was organized the reparations conference meeting in New Orleans here in 2017. Then I published the Journal of African American History, published a second special issue on reparations international movement in 2018. And that was co-edited by the two people who were the conveners of the conference at the University of Edinburgh. And that special issue included reparations articles on Jamaica, on the West Indies, the Virgin Islands, and Europe, and various places, as well as the United States. And so I was organizing reparations conferences and meetings at the local level in New Orleans, where I was living. I had a second one that I organized in 2022. We had a second reparations town hall meeting that organized. And then when the reparations programs that was headed up by Robin Ruth Simmons, who headed up in Evanston, Illinois, and launched the reparations campaign there. Her organization, Repair, held conferences in Evanston, brought people who are working in reparations in various parts of the country together at two different occasions. So I have attended many of the major reparations conference nationally and internationally since 2015.
Okay, so that's your background.
So I was published the two special issues, and I attended and participated in these international and national reparations conferences.
So what's significant about reparations and reparatory justice, past, present, and future?
Yes, I'm very happy that we were able to do this, to get it out. We should think of it, at least I think of it, as a handbook. It's a handbook. A handbook. It has all of the information that people would need to introduce and to discuss the issue of reparations, not just in the United States, but internationally, in their African American history classes, in their political science classes, in their sociology classes. It has a timeline, it has a bibliography, and it goes from the earliest reparations demands that we can document in the 18th century, all the way up until the 2020s, and it has both speeches by by well-known leaders in the reparations campaigns, not just in the United States, but also in the Caribbean as well. So in other words, it's not it's mostly on the United States, but it has international dimensions and includes it. So and then it has original scholarship on reparations projects, campaigns, and activities, and so that anyone interested in pursuing any campaign, a project, etc., that there's information in the what I think is really a handbook on to get them started on that. And then the other thing I think that that it's important is that it's reparations and reparatory justice. And so the idea that there's a need to repair reparations for African Americans. I'm looking at a historian, and I'm looking at the reparations movement similar to the way that I looked at the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement was Black-led. It had integrationist objective, but it was a Black-led movement. It came out of the Black experience, but then it eventually affected Puerto Ricans, Native Americans, women, gay people. They saw that there was discrimination, that there was injustices, that they were being and they were being denied certain rights. They were being excluded from certain areas, just as Africa. And so they then also said that, oh, we need, and sometimes they benefited more than African Americans from this. But the point is that this could be one of the reasons why we're here. You know,
you see it as a catalyst,
right, to initiate those kinds of things. And so there is a major need to repair the damage that is being done to the air, the land, the water by the fossil fuel companies, and other entities. And so reparatory justice. So I'm looking on this as documenting the reparations demands for African Americans on the basis of their experience, but at the same time, understanding that you now have a book on gay reparations. You now have books and articles on climate reparations. Mm-hmm. You have books and articles on health reparations, because those are areas in need of repair on the basis of damage that had been done to people by corporations, the government, businesses, etc., that need to be repaired. And so when we look at what should we do, for example, I look on the environmental justice movement as a reparatory justice, as an area under reparatory justice. So repairing the environment, and all of the damage that had been done to the environment, and so that the younger generation
who have been harmed by the pollution and
harmed and continually being harmed, and will continue to be harmed unless they do something about it.
That's
and
right.
so that in Young Crusaders, the epilogue of Young Crusaders, which deals with the civil rights movement, begins with teenagers in the environmental justice movement, and discuss them as crusaders in a new area, in a new era, etc. And I also deal with the teenagers in the Black Lives Matter movement. The women and girls who live.
That's what I want to do. Is we're running out of time, so we got 2 minutes. So just say something about Young Crusaders, because that's where I really wanted to put our focus here. But you've talked somewhat about your involvement, and so I can see where your early engagement in the movement would make you have an interest in the engagement of young people, as well as the fact that anyone who looked at the movement could see
See
the
children. Right, right. They just didn't pay. They didn't pay that much attention.
But your
Well,
book
what
is the
I
first
also
book
did.
focus on young folk. So
Yes, yes. I document the teenagers and the high school students' involvement in these various civil rights campaigns from the 1930s forward, and the leadership that they exercise. So that there are two ways that the teenagers and children were in campaigns that were organized by adults. The adults organized the campaign, and the teenagers and children participated. Sometimes they asked the children to make certain sacrifices and desegregate schools or college or institutions, etc. But those were organized by the adults, and the children and teenagers participated. But then there are the protests, the activities, the boycotts, the walkouts, the courses and programs and stuff that were organizations that were created by the teenagers, mostly high school students, to demand changes sometime in what is happening in their school. For example, demanding Black teachers, demanding Black history courses, demanding the changing the name of schools that were named after horrible racist people, etc. So they organize things that are related to their school, or they organize around the ongoing civil rights protests and boycotts and walkouts that were organized in the city at large. But they developed their own approach. They developed their own organized protests to bring about some kind of social change. So it's so I document the activities that the teenagers and young people participated in that were organized by adults, that they participate, and then I document what the high school students and sometimes elementary students did themselves. For example, you have something like the march that's from Selma to Montgomery. Teenagers themselves decided that they would go on this march, that their parents did not allow them. They said, and they were in groups, and the children were sometimes arrested together. The children are arrested. They decide to participate in these marches and protests, and they are arrested together and are imprisoned. And then they organize protests against their fellow students and teenagers that had been arrested and victimized and stuff. So it's both, and we see this more recently with the Black Lives Matter movement, as you know, that there were many of these protests that were associated with the Black Lives Matter movement that were organized by the teenagers.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. And I want to say that I truly appreciate your friendship, mentorship, and comradeship over the years. And we're going to have you back so that we can actually dig into the young crusaders. So at this time, I'm going to remove you from the screen, remove myself, and we will